In the last session, we discussed that it's very difficult for a person to serve Hashem, and certainly to serve Hashem properly as we really should. And it's not by accident, but actually part of the design of the world. But this session, I'd like to discuss a completely different reason why it's very difficult for us to fully serve Hashem, to serve Hashem properly. And to do that, I'd like to share with you an interesting concept. The Torah describes an Isha Sota, a woman who improperly loses her fidelity. She's no longer trusted by her husband. Her husband suspects her of being with another man. Her husband warns her in front of another aide. And if in fact she violates that warning, she fits into the category of an Isha Sota. And the Psukim are very clear when they detail what happens to this woman. Dabra b'nei Yisrael, Hashem says, speak to the b'nei Yisrael, v'mart aleim, say to them, Ish ki tiste ishto. The word tiste is a very strange expression. It's not used anywhere else in the Torah. And Rashi explains, what does it mean? This expression, explains Rashi, Ein amanafim noafim, the adulterers will not commit an act of adultery, achetikanis bem ruach shtus, until a wind of insanity enters them. And tiste is from the word shota, from insanity. The adulterers will not commit an act of adultery until a wave of insanity enters them. That's why the Torah refers to it that way. And the Siftei Chachamim explains, obviously, it doesn't mean a wave of insanity, because if they're insane, they're not culpable. They're not responsible for what they've done. It explains the Siftei Chachamim, what it means is, Sheyitzram hara, the Yetzer hara mora lem heter, teaches them a heter. It tells them it's permitted. The adulterers will not commit an act of adultery until the Yetzer hara tells them it's permitted, until he's mora heter to them. And that's how the Siftei Chachamim explains this Rashi. And I'd like to share with you that this Siftei Chachamim is very difficult to understand. And I'll explain to you why. A mora heter is a very specific halachic term. And it doesn't mean that, well, it's wrong, but what could I do? I'm weak. I gave in. I know I shouldn't, but what could I do? Mora heter means that it's permitted. Mora, as in teaching, heter, permitted. It's an expression that refers to the fact when you go to a mora hara, when you go to a rav, to paskin, he will tell you it's permitted or not permitted. Mora heter means the Yetzer hara tells you it's permitted. And if you think about it, that's very difficult to understand. Because Rashi is telling us none of the adulterers, no one, will do this act until the Yetzer hara tells them it's permitted. Now let's work through the full gamut of people. Let's imagine for a moment we have a very virtuous woman, a very modest woman. And Nebuch, she got into a bad situation. She went to the finest schools, finest seminary. She got married and things turned badly. Maybe he was emotionally abusive. Things turned from bad to worse. And somehow she met someone. She doesn't know how she ended up there, but she ended up having an affair. Here's the problem. Rashi's saying she won't do this until the Yetzer hara tells her it's permitted. She's a tsunua. She's a fully well-educated woman. How could the Yetzer hara tell her it's permitted? Well, the Torah was given on Shabbos and today's Tuesday. What possible heter is there? So if we're dealing with a tsunua, with a modest woman, there's no way in the world the Yetzer hara could tell her it's permitted because she's not foolish. Maybe you'll tell me we're dealing with the opposite end of the spectrum. A prutza, a woman who just doesn't care. If a woman doesn't care, then she doesn't need the heter. If her attitude is, God, the religion, I don't care about it, why does the Yetzer hara have to give her a heter? This Rashi is difficult to understand on either end of the spectrum. What do you mean that the adulterers will never commit this act until the Yetzer hara gives them a rationale why it's permitted? Either end of the spectrum, either she'll never believe it or she doesn't need it. What does Rashi mean? And I'd like to see if we could better understand this Rashi and in fact understand what this Chazal shares with us. And to do that, I'd like to share with you an interesting little thought. In the 1930s, there was one of the most notorious gangsters who ever shot up the streets of New York City. His name was Two Gun Crowley. Tugun Crowley was a ruthless, hardened criminal. The police commissioner at the time described him as a man who was cold-blooded, would kill at the drop of a hat. Tugun Crowley finished his career when he was caught in the West End of Manhattan in his apartment, and he was surrounded by 150 policemen. Every building, they had mounted machine guns, and it was a 1 hour-long shootout. 10,000 people on the street of New York watched for an entire hour while he kept the New York City Police Department at bay, and this was a major shootout. In the end, he was shot. They broke into the roof of his apartment, and they found him unconscious over a piece of paper. And in his blood-drenched paper was his last will and testament. And this is how it read. It read, "To whom it may concern. Under my coat lies a lonely heart, but a good heart. A heart that would do no man any harm." And he signed it. Amazingly, he was shot, unconscious, but wasn't dead. And they took him to the hospital. They operated, and he stood trial and was committed to the execution, to the electric chair. But to understand who he was, how did he end up in that West End apartment? A few hours earlier, he had been in Central Park, and a policeman asked him for his license. He was behind the wheel of the car. He could have easily driven off. Why take any chances? He reaches in, pulls out his revolver, shoots the policeman dead, jumps out of his car, pulls out the service revolver of the policeman, shoots him again, gets back in his car, drives off. That's a lonely heart, a heart that would do no man any harm. Amazingly, while he's being walked to the electric chair, he's overheard saying these words, "This is what I get for trying to defend myself." And this phenomena that we human beings never do anything wrong is something that's endemic of the human population. You will find me any sort of person from any sort of background, and certainly if they're involved in something that's clearly, markedly wrong, there's always a rationale, always a story, always a reason. Dale Carnegie, in his book, How to Win Friends and Influence People, writes about the fact that he had an ongoing conversation with the warden of Sing Sing. Sing Sing at the time was the maximum security prison of its day. These were the most ruthless criminals in the time. And the warden of Sing Sing explained to Dale Carnegie that every man in his prison was innocent. Every one of them had a reason, a rationale. None of them were guilty. And this seems to be a feature within the human, that I never do anything wrong. And I got a chance to see this in a little bit more of a up-close and personal manner. I was a Rebbe in Rochester Yeshiva for many years, and I was very close with the guys. And unfortunately, there was a string of genevas in the yeshiva. Somebody was stealing money, and it was ongoing for a while, and they couldn't catch the fellow. Eventually, they caught him red-handed, and it turned out to be a guy in my shir, and a fellow I knew very well, and I didn't understand it because he was a regular guy, very friendly, and we had a good relationship. I sat him down to talk, and I said, "Help me understand. These are your buddies. These are friends. I don't get it." And he said to me, "Rabbi, you have to understand. Everybody needs money. Some people, their parents give money to them. Some people have a job. This is how I earn money." But he meant it. And this phenomena that I never do anything wrong is something that you'll see over and over and over in the human being. Now we'll call it all kinds of names, ego defense mechanisms, but here's the question. How does it function? I have intelligence. I have understanding. How do I believe it? How do I actually say the words? And to understand how this functions, I'd like to focus on another feature that Hashem created in the human being. In the human being, Hashem created something called imagination. There were a number of reasons for it. One of the primary reasons why Hashem created imagination is because it allows me to believe fanciful beliefs, theories, and thoughts. And if you'd like to see it in operation, just focus on the following. Imagine you're watching a movie, and suddenly the music starts to change. It becomes ominous and scary, and the lighting gets a little dim, and suddenly the hero's walking down an alley, and suddenly, jump, thug, street, boom, kick, punch, stop. If we took your pulse right then, your heart would be racing. You might have sweaty palms. And wait, I don't get it. It's a movie. I mean, if they turn on the lights, you'd see it's a screen. What are you getting all bent out of shape for? Have you ever read a book and gotten completely involved emotionally? Many women fall in love every time they read a novel. But how do you explain that? I am not a pirate sailing the seven seas. I am not an Olympic athlete. And yet when I read that book, I am. And would you like to understand one of the secrets? One of the key ingredients to a successful Hollywood movie is the casting director. The casting director's job it is to find the perfect actor to fit that role. But it's not to find the most popular actor, not even to find the best actor. It's to find the actor that the audience most will identify with. To find the actor who, when he plays that role, it's not him up there, but it's me. So when he's walking down that alley, because I identify with him, I become that person. I'm living the story. I'm going through those emotions because I'm there. I'm living it. Now, isn't that silly? Isn't that ridiculous? I'm an intelligent human being. I get it. I'm not there. But that's reality. And Hashem created this feature called imagination in the human because it allows us to take flights of fancy. It allows us to envision things, to picture things. And one of the key features of imagination is it allows me to believe exactly that which I would like to believe. I am not nailed to the truth. I'm not held down to reality. I could believe what I like exactly as I like, and that allows for free will. You see, if Hashem didn't create this feature called free will, then the human being would have no purpose in being on the planet. And if Hashem didn't create this feature called imagination, there would be no free will. How could I do something that's clearly wrong? I want his money, but I can't take his money. It's stealing. He's a friend of mine. I want to kill the guy. I'm a murderer. That's who I am. But I can't do it. Why? Because within me there's a clear voice that says it's murder. You can't shoot a policeman in cold blood. He has a wife, he has kids. What are you doing? How could you do something so cruel, so evil? And the human being would not have free will. Why? Because part of me is an neshama. Hashem took me from under the Kisei HaKavod, from under the throne of glory, and put me into this body. But I understand what's right and what's wrong. I understand that there's a way to act in a way that's not the right way to act. And if I didn't have imagination, there's no human being alive who could do the things that we human beings do. But imagination is this powerful feature that allows me to create theories, allows me to create entire philosophies that justify exactly what I do. Everyone would steal. They're just not as bold as me. They're just not as courageous as I am. And if you're not sure that this is correct, I challenge you to read one book. It's called Mein Kampf. Adolf Hitler's treatise, 800 pages of drivel. But if you read page after page, what you read is a powerful rationale why he's servicing mankind by eliminating the Jewish people, their vermin, their pestilence. Page after page detailing why it's a mitzvah, why he's serving the highest order, why he's helping mankind by ridding them of these parasitical beings called the Jews. And I want you to understand that it wasn't just propaganda. You cannot take a Nazi and tell him, go kill a Jewish baby. He needs a philosophy, he needs a theology, he needs something to believe in because you can't kill men, women, and children in cold blood, because within you is a voice that says, how could you do that? Hans, what are you doing? What are you doing? You're killing a person. And there has to be an answer, because a human being could never do it. And the answer is, the Fuhrer is right. 80 million people, the fatherland. It's the fatherland first. And certainly 10 million of those people were able to buy into it, were able to swallow it, believe it, at least to the level that they can act on it. And when you see the imagination in operation, what you're seeing is a human being who's able to believe exactly that which he wants to believe. And with that feature, now the human being has free will, because now exactly what I want to do, I can do. If I want to serve my Creator, if I want to do what's right, good, and proper, I can follow it. But if I don't wish to do that, I can create entire philosophies, entire worldviews, Weltanschauungs that explain why what I'm doing, exactly what I'm doing, is a mitzvah, is right, is serving the highest purpose. And you will never find a man doing something wrong. Every human being rides on that white steed. Every human being wears that white hat. I am the hero of my own biography. And if you'd like to understand the answer to the promiscuous woman, why does she need the heter? Because no human being can do something wrong. If she accepted the Torah, if she accepted the Torah's right, I cannot do it. Until the Yetzer Hara says, nah, come on, the Torah doesn't apply to you, it's not relevant, doesn't mean anything. But she needs that heter, she needs it to be permitted, because no matter where she ended up, she cannot do something wrong. She would never allow herself to do it. And if you'd like to understand the opposite side, the woman is brought up in the best Beis Yaakovs, and she has a fully firm grip on religion. How could she buy into a lie like that? The answer is that's a power of imagination. Because credible lies are what we accept. We call them rational lies. We rationalize to ourselves. They're just rational enough to allow me to buy into it. I can never sell them to a jury of my peers. I can never explain it to anyone else, but it's just about good enough for me to accept. And with that, I can now do exactly that which I want to do. And I believe that this concept has many, many implications and many manifestations in our world. Let me share with you one piece of advice. Don't ever get into a debate. Don't debate anyone on any subject whatsoever. Don't do it. Why? Because what will happen is very simple. You will lose. And I don't care how well armed you are. I don't care how intelligent you are. The more firmly you debate a point, and the better you make your point, the more you will lose, guaranteed. Why? Because the better my logic is, and the more I make my point powerfully and strongly, the more you're going to resist it, and the more you're going to just either ignore, sidestep, or totally disregard my logic, my position. Do you ever find that you presented something to someone in a clear debate and, oh, you're right, I'm wrong, I never thought about that way? It's never what happens. What happens is almost automatically there's a whole different story, a whole different take, and the only thing that happens in a debate is that both sides end up more convinced of their being right than before. But how could that be? My logic is impeccable. My understanding is perfect. How could this person who's intelligent deny that which they see right in front of their eyes? And the answer is we do it all the time. If I don't want to believe it, I don't. I won't accept it. And if you're not sure that this is true, just speak to an atheist. Just speak to one of your local atheists and present to them the obvious facts. Look at this world, the complexity, the harmonious systems. Look at the vastness. Look at everything. Tell me it just happened. And there is no logical way that a human being can say it just happened, except for the fact that I don't want to accept God. And as a matter of fact, Rabbi Chanan Wasserman explains that the mitzvah of emunah is typically misunderstood. He asks, how could the Torah command me to believe? If I believe in Hashem, I don't need a mitzvah, I already believe. And if I don't believe in Hashem, I command you to believe, but I don't believe. Meaning, if I don't want to put on tefillin, and the Torah tells me I have to put on, okay, I put on tefillin. I don't want to wear tzitzit, the Torah says, okay, I do it. But how can you say, heart, I command you to believe, but I don't believe. Oh, I command you to believe, but I don't. Yochanan Wasserman says it can't be. If I believe, I don't need a mitzvah, and if I don't believe, no commandment in the world is going to make me believe. And he explains that actually that's not what the mitzvah is. The mitzvah is not a commandment to believe in Hashem. The mitzvah is a commandment to be honest. Put away your agenda. Put away your bias. Forget the what ifs. Well, if I accept there's a God, then forget that. Ask yourself, what does my eye see? What does my mind tell me? If I'm critically honest, the fact that this world has a creator is clear, obvious, it's simple. If I don't want to believe, nothing in the world will convince me. And when Hashem created this force of imagination in the human being, I could stare at the ball of the sun and say, it's not there. And it's something that happens all the time, and something that we human beings are involved in all the time. On the big picture issues like belief, we understand it. But I believe that it functions in a much more down-to-earth kind of way that affects us on a daily basis. I'll explain to you what that is. If I ask you, why don't you sin? Why don't you sin? Most of us will say something like, well, listen, Torah told me not to do it. My Yiras Shamayim stops me from sinning. And while I wish that were true, I believe that there are many other forces that actually function to a greater extent. And I'll explain to you what I mean. Here's a question. Would you eat a cheeseburger? Would you eat a cheeseburger? So I believe the answer is no. Absolutely. No. Would you speak Lashon Hara? Have you ever spoken Lashon Hara? And I'm afraid to say that the answer probably is yes. Well, here's the observation. If you eat a cheeseburger, at most you'll get 1, 2 lavim maybe. 3 at most. The Chavetz Chaim does the math for us. 17 los assays, 14 assays, 4 curses. Granted, you're not going to hit all of them in one story of Lashon Hara, but you will hit multiple averas in one story of Lashon Hara. Far worse than eating a cheeseburger. If you compare the two, there is no comparison. Speaking Lashon Hara is far worse. So here's an interesting observation. In my entire life, I have never once eaten a cheeseburger. Ever. Never. Yet, I'm embarrassed to say that I have spoken Lashon Hara. But I don't get it. How could that be? I learned the halachas. I learned the halachas very well. I've given shir on the halachas. How could it be? I get it. I understand it. I know the gravity of it. How is it possible? Cheeseburgers I never touch. Wouldn't dream of it. Yet Lashon Hara. And I'd like to share with you the answer. The answer is a cheeseburger's treif. Hey, come on, are you kidding me? It's absolutely, completely forbidden, out of bounds, beyond question. Lashon Hara, listen, I'm not saying it's a mitzvah, but it's not forbidden. And I could learn it. I could study it. I could review it. But it never becomes that forbidden, untouchable sort of category. And if you think about it, the vast majority of the things that we do and that we don't do are based on this sort of aura of I do these kind of things or I don't do these kind of things. These things I do, these things I don't. And I'll give you a good example. You have a fellow who cannot stop smoking. He can't stop for any money in the world. He tries this, doesn't work. Yet he never smokes on Shabbos. I don't understand. How's it possible? The answer is smoking on Shabbos is forbidden. You don't do that. You can't do that. You're not allowed. You have a person who can't keep to a diet. Anytime she passes that donut, yet she doesn't eat on Yom Kippur. I had a fellow in my shir who was ADHD out the window. And as you know, ADHD has 2 components. One is the distractibility, and the other is impulsivity. This fellow was the most impetuous person you could ever imagine. Before he could even think about thinking, he already had said it or done it or whatever it was. His psychologist, who was not Jewish, said to him, I've never met a more impetuous person in my life. And the psychologist had a question. He said, I don't get it. How do you keep kosher? How is it possible that you don't eat, you keep Shabbos? How is it possible? So much before you think you're already doing things, how is it possible that you don't violate Shabbos? And the answer is that's completely, absolutely out of bounds. You could have ADHD, but you're not going to smash your fist into the wall. It's stupid. You don't eat treif. You don't drive a car on Shabbos. Just don't do those things. And when something is in that category of untouchable, I don't do it. But if it's not in that category, well, it's a whole different story. The fellow I knew was about tshuva. And he had a major marriage problem. His marriage problem was that his wife was also Balas tshuva. And they both made tremendous strides. And they were both very, very impressive human beings. But this fellow, every once in a while, passed McDonald's, and he couldn't help but go in. And his wife would find out, and it became a big issue. He wasn't proud of it. He didn't wish he would, but never, he couldn't help himself. And you understand why? It was very simple. He had grown up eating McDonald's. That was his food. For him to stop required a total reversal, a total change, and it never really took on that aura of forbidden. It never entered that full Isser. And maybe if it once did, he slipped. And once he slipped, it was done. And I'd like to share with you that this concept of things that I do and things that I don't do affects me in many, many ways. What happens when that thing that you never do, one time you do? You did it one time. You've broken the aura. Now suddenly it's in a different category. But you see, what happened is it went from something that I never ever do to something that I've done. And suddenly I've taken it to a different category. It's now something I'm not proud of. I wish I didn't, but I've done it. And if I leave it in that new state, I am in grave, grave danger. Why? Because very likely I'm going to do it a second time. Because I've shattered that untouchable sense about it. And I've shattered that aura. And now in this state, it's quite likely I'm going to do it a second time. And what happens if I do it a second time? Chazal says, once you do it a second time, nasilo keheter, it's now permitted. What do you mean it's permitted? How's it permitted? It's not permitted. It's still an isser. It's forbidden for me to eat a hamburger. It's forbidden for me to look at those things. It's forbidden for me to go on the internet and do. I get it. But that's not true. Because you see, once I've done it, and I did it a second time, it's no longer in that category of absolutely, totally out of bounds. It's no longer in that category of things I don't do, things that are unthinkable. It's now something, listen, I'll try to resist it. I'm going to try to stay away from it. It's not good for me. But it lost that special aura, and now I'm in grave danger. But what happens if I do that a third time? If I do that a third time, Rabbi Shafier explains, then it's nasalo k'mitzvah. It becomes a mitzvah, and I'll explain to you why. And once I do that act, it was forbidden, absolutely out of bounds. I never would dream about it, never would do it, but I did it once, I did it twice, and I did it a third time. And now I reach the following cognitive dissonance. How could it be? How could I, a good, self-respecting citizen, do that which is forbidden? It's usser. It's absolutely out of bounds. How could I live with how could I do that? I can't do it, but I did it. I can't, but I did. And I only have one choice. I either somehow bring it back to that level of absolutely forbidden, or much more easily, I whitewash it. I make it permitted. Come on, it's not really forbidden, not for me, not in these times, not in these circumstances. And I firmly believe that all of us have two Shulchan Aruchs. There is one Shulchan Aruch that applies to the rest of humanity. And then there's a separate Shulchan Aruch that applies for me. I have a different set of rules, a different set of laws. I play by different laws than everyone else. And I can tell you it's forbidden. But based on my situation, my conditions, who I am, where it's a little bit different. And this idea that we have two Shulchan Aruchs, one that applies to the rest of the world and one that applies to me, is something that happens all the time. I'll share with you an interesting example. There was a fellow who began a new job, many other frum people working in that company. The first day he comes in with a bottle of milk and leaves it in the fridge. Comes lunchtime to take the milk for his coffee, and someone had taken his milk. Obviously, someone made a mistake. Okay. Next day he comes in and he puts the words private, puts a label on his bottle so no one would make a mistake, and puts the milk in the fridge, and comes lunchtime and the bottle's empty. The third day he comes in and he writes the words, "This is private milk. Please do not take it." And he puts the bottle in the fridge, and he comes lunchtime and finds the bottle empty. And he's flabbergasted. I don't believe it. I wrote the words, "Please don't take." He comes in the next day and he writes the words, "I am makpid gomer. It is geneva. It is stealing. Please do not take my private milk." And now he's confident that no one would steal it. And he puts it in the fridge, and it comes lunchtime, finds the bottle empty. And now he realizes he's got a problem. The next day he comes in with a bottle of milk, and he writes the words chalav stam on it, puts it in the fridge, comes lunchtime and finds the milk untouched. Now, chalav stam means it's not chalav Yisrael. It means it's not supervised. But in this country, there's almost no possibility of it really being treif. Should you eat chalav Yisrael? Yes. Should you own? Okay, fine. But you're not going to tell me that it's really treif. So how's it possible? The guy would steal his milk. That's not a problem. But chalav stam, if it's not chalav Yisrael, I won't touch it. And the answer is really simple. Listen, I don't drink chalav stam. Come on. You know, goy? But the guy wrote on a Geneva, it's still, come on, what right does this guy have to be so wrong, so self-centered, so selfish? And he's a creep. And the human being is quite capable of explaining it away and rationalizing it. And you'll find this over and over. People who are deeply religious, who act in ways that you got to say, whoa, I don't get it. I don't understand it. And this is something that affects every aspect of our life. I have a good friend of mine, Rabbi Chaim Leiter, and a number of years ago I called him up and I said, Chaim, be honest. You have to be honest with me. Please. He said, what? Chaim, tell me, am I a nice guy? Yeah, you're a nice guy. No, Chaim, be honest, please. Please, I beg, please be honest. You got to be honest. You're a friend of mine for many years. Please, tell me, am I a nice guy? Yeah, you're a nice guy. Please tell me the truth. Yes, you're a nice guy. What's your problem? And I'll tell you what my problem was. I had just gotten off an hour-long phone call with the most obnoxious human being I had ever spoken to. And when I was speaking to this man, I realized there's no way in the world that he could view himself as I am now viewing him. He would run away. He'd hide. So obviously, he doesn't get it. And after an hour of going through that, I said to myself, wait a minute. If he is so off balance, if he so thoroughly doesn't understand how he's presenting, oh my goodness, what does it say about me? And I called up a friend of mine for a reality check because I said, oh my goodness, maybe I too. And while in that case, I hope it wasn't a justified fear, the reality is that it's very, very critical that we human beings check ourselves. And the more you hear over and over from someone that you have an issue, it's time to listen. And as the expression goes, if you hear from one person, you're a horse, you ignore it. If you hear from two people, you're a horse, you ignore it. From three people, when you hear from the fourth person, you put on a blanket and you begin riding on all fours. Because after a while, you have to open your ears and recognize that people are giving me messages. And my ability to live in the reality that I shape, my ability to paint everyone as wrong and me alone as right is so natural to us that it takes a lot of training to break out of it. And the more you get used to opening your mind to maybe I'm wrong, the greater your possibility of actually growing. Maybe one of the greatest liabilities we have is this free-flowing imagination. You see, I have no hope of working on any area in my life because everything I do is justified, everything I do is right, so I can never improve. I can't grow. In fact, I love it when we get close to Yom Kippur, and almost all of us go through that. Wait a minute, what do I have to work on? Let me think about it. Yom Kippur is coming. What are the areas that I should focus on? And it takes a while. I have to sort of think about it and delve and figure out what I've been doing wrong. Yet if I asked a jury of my peers what I need to work on, it wouldn't take them long at all. And if I would ask my spouse, it wouldn't take but a heartbeat. How is that possible? How is it possible that everyone else has such a clear understanding of what I do wrong and I don't? And the answer to that is because I have this incredible capacity to paint the image, view it as I wish, and this is one of the greatest liabilities of being a human being. To allow for free will, Hashem gave us this capacity, but to allow me to grow, it's one of the greatest obstacles. How could I work on any interpersonal relationship when any single situation I get into, I'm right and the other one's wrong? You ever see two people get into a fight? And when they're done, each one says, oh, you were right. No, you were right. No, you were right. I'm 100% right. No, I'm 100% right. And they'll fight that way. And they'll fight that way for years and years and years. And if you've ever been on the third party end of that, and you understand that both of them are dead wrong, and you also understand that neither one is capable of hearing the other side, you're watching the human being. And for a person to actually grow, this is one of the greatest obstacles. For me to be able to see past my own limitations. And to do that, you need a Rebbe, you need people who are older, people who are wiser, you need friends, you need people that you train yourself to listen to. And more than anything, you need to be critically self-honest. Now, in our day and age, we have so much, oh my goodness, I'll probably break if I ever see my flaws. You won't break. The ability to look in the mirror and say, I messed up. I did wrong. I did something wrong. I said something wrong. What I did, how can I admit it? I'm going to die. You're not going to die. I'm not going to break. I'm not so fragile. I messed up. I did something wrong. But you mean it's right? No, it's wrong. How'd you do it? I did it. I'm a human being, mortal, flesh and blood, made out of very, very simple material, and I messed up. And that ability to actually look in the mirror and say the words, I failed, I made an error, I did something wrong, and be able to walk away and understand that I still am a human being with much capacity, much potential. It doesn't destroy me. I may have failed, but that doesn't mean I'm a failure. But getting comfortable with that takes a while. I think this Rashi is sharing with us a fundamental concept. The adulterers will not commit an act of adultery until the Torah teaches them that it's permitted. Why? Because if the woman is promiscuous, she can't do it unless she has a good rationale why it's allowed and it's okay. I don't care what level of society you're on. I don't care what level of conduct you're on. If it's forbidden, if it's wrong, you won't do it. And you have to have a reason, a rationale to explain it away. And if you'd like to understand the tsunua, the very modest woman who was brought up in the finest yeshivas, and she knows it's wrong, how could she believe it? And the answer is that's the power of imagination. Watch imagination when you're reading a book. Watch imagination while you're listening to a play. And you feel yourself getting caught up in it. And you feel like it's you. And you know it's not, but you do, you don't, you do, you do. That is us. And that part of us plays all day, every day. In every single situation, I find justifications, I find rationales, I find excuses. And what it does is it makes me feel okay for a moment, but it becomes one of the greatest blinding forces in my existence. If I don't do things wrong, I can never change and I can never grow. I'm stymied. I'm at this level forever and I'm stuck. An ability to recognize that, yes, I've done things wrong. Whether it be interpersonal things, whether it be between me and Hashem, there are things that I've done I wish I didn't, but they're wrong. And interestingly enough, Rabbeinu Yonah explains one of the greatest aspects of tshuva is not just the fact that I eliminate the sin, which alone is stupendous, but explains even more than that. What I can do is bring back the original luster. You see, if I really work on an area and I really separate from it and I cry the bitter, bitter tears of regret and I go through the entire process and I spend a lot of energy, effort, I can separate from that act. I could put that act back into the category of a thing that I don't do. I never do. I would never think about doing. It's divorced from me and separate from me. It's back in the category of untouchable, unthinkable. And one of the greatest features of tshuva is that if you separate from something, and even if it was a long habit that you were involved in, but you separate from it and you distance yourself, you could put it back in that category. And I think this concept affects almost every situation in our lives, and I believe it affects our avodas Hashem to a tremendous extent. And I want to close with one illustration of this concept. Rabbi Levin was known as a tzaddik in our time, and if you read his biography, you'll see he was just that, a tzaddik. The man was such a loving, giving, beautiful human being. He lived in Eretz Yisrael before the state of Israel existed, and he did chasadim, he did chesed of unimaginable proportions. He used to regularly visit the Jews in prison. Many of those Jews were political prisoners, including Menachem Begin, etc. Many of those Jews were plain Jews who were in prison. He would visit them regularly. He'd bring whatever good tidings he could to them, whatever cheer he could, and he tried to encourage them. There was one man who he would visit regularly who had killed his neighbor. It was a fit of anger, a fight over a garbage can of all things, and he murdered his neighbor, and he was now in prison. And Rabbi Levin would come visit him and try to cheer him up, try to give him a new sense of life. And one time, Rabbi Levin said to him, "Come, let's put on tefillin. Let's put on tefillin." And the man said, "Really? I could do?" "Yes, come, let's do it." And Rabbi Levin took out the tefillin, and he goes to put it on the man's left arm, which is where normally a right-handed person would put it on. And the man says, "No, I cannot put it on this hand." Rabbi Levin says, "Why? Are you a lefty?" No. "So why can't you put it on his arm?" The man said, This arm killed a man. I cannot put on tefillin on this arm. Put it on this arm." And in fact, Rabbi Levin put the tefillin on the other arm. Now I want to share with you one interesting observation. No arm ever killed another human being. Men kill men, arms don't. What do you mean the arm? I can't put tefillin on his arm because his arm killed a human being. What this man had to do, he couldn't live with the awesome guilt of having killed a human being. In some way he transferred it. This arm did it. This arm killed it. I can't put tefillin on this arm. And on some level it made him feel better. And if it sounds strange, that's something that we do all the time. And it's something you have to understand and recognize. I cannot live with that guilt because I feel I'm going to break. I'm not going to break. And if I could train myself to be a gibor, to recognize I failed, I messed up, I did it. Not my arm, not my leg. I did it. Why? Because I'm a human being. So it means I'm worthless? No, I'm not worthless. You're a failure? I'm not a failure. I am a human being. Like every human being, I succeed, I fail, I messed up. And that ability to look myself in the eye and say, I messed up, and then to correct it is the key tool to growth in almost every area of life. But to do that, you have to be honest, you have to be critical, you have to be able to say the words, yes, I did wrong, I accept it, and then go forward. And to do that, you have to learn not to believe the lies that the Yetzer Hara tells us, not to believe this lie, I never do anything wrong, to get comfortable with the fact that I, as a human being, do things wrong, and then to set my goal to change, to grow, and then I begin that growth pattern of being a great person heading upwards.